because I had an interesting week. It might have something to do with something that we said last Sunday, maybe. And I'm using we in the royal sense. Rob, maybe. Something that Rob said. Something maybe about like oil and Iraq and war, things like that. Now, if you're on staff here, you know that I try to be very open. I try to be very honest about the things that we're fielding, the things that we're dealing with. I try to honor people with that kind of openness. So I want to give you a sense about the kind of feedback that we've been getting this week from last week's talk. Now, some of you are totally there. You are hearing things. You may not like it, but you feel it moving you in a direction that, for you, is just part of your discipleship. That's where some of you are. But none of you wrote in, actually. Those of you who did fall into two categories, and I seriously do not want to demean or disrespect any of you who did. I just want to caricaturize the two sort of categories of input that came. One of them is basically it is not appropriate to talk about politics. The timing of talking about war is inappropriate. There's a real issue with us going in that direction. Some of you had real issue with the way that we used statistics, because there's the quote about some people are liars, some people are, and then some people just quote statistics. I don't remember it, but it's clever. Anyway, in other words, statistics can be easily manipulated. And so some of you raise questions about how we're using statistics and are concerned about discussions about war that move into the political realm. On the other side, there's a group of you that I might call the overeager. It's about time. Oh, now Mars Hill's going to take up our political agenda and are going to get on all of these things like war and like the environment, and we're going to become politically active in these ways. The overeager. Well, as I have a struggle or a concern. I have a legitimate concern about both of those sides, and I want to tell you what that is in just a minute. But as you know, most of you know, that before I came to Mars Hill, I was with an agency called World Relief, and my life was informed by this very unusual regular commute, probably on a monthly basis, between the third world and the first. So it was not uncommon for me to be in a war zone one day and at a PTA meeting just a few days later. To be in a famine on one day and a few days later be sledding with my kids in a neighborhood park in Baltimore. And I struggled with the tension, carrying the weight of that tension. Some of you know the story I told about one Sunday being at a church and hearing a refugee pastor say if we had $700, we'd buy new plastic sheeting and we could meet inside out of the rain next to this war zone. The next Sunday, hearing one of my very dear friends, a pastor in a suburb in America, talking about moving the building campaign from 7 million to 9 million so that we can get a balcony and have better sight lines to the stage and a greater sense of intimacy. All in 1 week. And the tension that this created in me was huge. When I came back from the third world carrying this tension, my culture gives me two options of what to do with that tension. One of them is a conservative vision of triumphal American values prevailing around the world. The other one is a more liberal view of complaint and of cynicism and of a worldview of scarcity. There is only so much to go around, and if you have, you better feel really guilty and you better give away to the poor. And when I came back carrying this very living, very real tension, I realized there was only one way I could deal with it, and it would not be found in the rhetoric of either side. The only thing I could do to resolve this tension was to actually get something done. To talk to people, to tell them about what I saw, to create opportunities where the conservative entrepreneur can use their gifts, and where the liberal who is angry about what's going on can have a place to channel that into causes that connect with the kingdom of God. So as this dialogue happens here, I'm concerned about the mail that I get, and I'm reaching out to you with these ideas on both. For those of you who struggle with the timing and our willingness to talk about these things now, I'm very concerned that we would offend you before we have an opportunity to engage you. That would be a disaster. If some of you who love God and who are ready to get involved but get ticked off because of some of the things that we say, and you go away and you miss the coming days of service and opportunity that it is my job to create here, wow, that would be a huge, huge loss for the kingdom and for Mars Hill. On the other hand, if we become filled with a spirit of complaint, a cynicism, a view of the world that says there is scarcity of wealth and we must just give it away, as opposed to a view that says this is God's open universe and we can use our skills to create wealth for others and to empower them to create wealth for themselves, so that they can live in dignity, so that they can rise up to the challenges of their environment. If our message gets co-opted by either side, we've lost, and I would be very concerned. So here's the things that I will commit to you. We will not fail to preach Jesus at Mars Hill. Amen? We will not fail to preach Jesus in all of his comfort and in all of his challenge. We will not fail to ask the tough questions of our government in the use of power. We will ask those questions because the gospel begs them. And we will also not give ourselves over to a lament, to cynicism, and to despair. We will not do that. What we will do, and something that I do every day in my job, I wake up and I work to create a capability here for this place so that we can convert all of this energy into ways that change the world. Because I'm convinced that if we busy ourselves with Christ in the name of the kingdom of God, if we're able to make a difference in the world, we will see a difference and a change in our own hearts. So that's what I will commit to. In practical terms, February the 18th, Rob and I will unveil something we've been talking about, which is what we've phrased it this way: joining the God of the oppressed to do X, Y, and Z. And on February the 18th, we're going to unveil the first round of XYZ. That is time-bound, measurable, missional goals that we will pursue as a community. We will create a multitude of different ways, graduated from very difficult to very easy for anyone to engage with. Mission opportunities for this community. Those are the things that we will commit to. Creating capabilities for this community to engage the work of the gospel. Can I get an amen? Amen. All right. I'm going to pray for Rob. We're going to carry on this season, this sermon series, and we're going to invite the Holy Spirit to teach us, to use us, and to change us. Father God, we commit this time to you, and I pray for Rob, and I thank you so much for the gift that you've given him, the clarity, the prophetic word, and I pray that he would bring it with courage, with confidence, and that he would speak on behalf of the Spirit. I pray that you would prepare our hearts to receive, to be challenged. Father, please create one people, neither from this side nor from that side, but by your side, serving humanity in the name of Christ for the sake of his coming kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
I am so glad that Don Golden moved to Grand Rapids. I'm almost every time I'm like, man, I'm so glad you moved here. And he's like, are you going to be saying that in 10 years? Yeah, I am. I'm just going to keep saying it. Let's hand out some Bibles, shall we? There are some very proper-looking people in the aisles with Bibles. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 5. Let's start there. And as we're getting ready to roll, we're calling all the artists, and we want your creations, because next Saturday night when we start our Christmas services, we want to have this room filled with art all around the edges. And there's a rumor has it that Alan Close has created a piece of art bigger than the last art show. So I know you'll wait for bated breath for that. Something about, I couldn't even really understand it when you explained it, but it'll be genius, trust me. And so all of you artists still have a couple of days to turn in your art, and we love it and are looking forward to seeing it. And then secondly, those of you who are on this journey and you find yourself thinking, all this stuff, I need more help, I need more guidance. You're awakening to things about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be an American, what it means to take the Scriptures and seriously wrestle with them, to ask hard questions, to wrestle with the work of, okay, the Scriptures say this, what does that mean in the world that I find myself in? We have 2 Bible scholars coming in early January. Brian and Sylvia are actually married, and they've written a book recently together called Colossians Remixed. And they have a unique gift for essentially pulling out of the Bible, especially the New Testament, in this case, the book of Colossians. Okay, here's what this passage meant for the first people who heard it. Now let's begin a discussion about what it means to live that out now. And so they're going to come and do a Saturday here at Mars Hill with plenty of time for interaction, for questions. And for those of you who are like, okay, I'm trying to get my head around this stuff you're saying, but I need more things to hold on to, I cannot recommend enough the Colossians Remix session early January. I believe it's like the first or second weekend, and all that info, website, weekly, etc. So, are you ready to roll? Okay, my goal in this passage we're going to look at just a couple of verses. 1, 2, 3, 4 verses. And my goal is to serve you by giving you as much possible background and insight I can. My goal is that these passages we look at, that I'm assuming some of you have heard before, you will see how the original audience would have understood what Jesus was saying. And I'm hoping that some of you become Christians today, because you say, this is so brilliant, this guy, I want more. But these passages we're going to look at, this Jesus, it is, well, let's just do it. How about that? So, we'll start in chapter 5, actually, verse 1, because I want to give you a setting of the context. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, Matthew 5, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. So Jesus is teaching to his first followers, the assumption being that there's some sort of crowd that's listening in. Jesus is teaching these people who have said, yes, I'm in. He's teaching them his way, but his way is so compelling that a crowd is listening in like, I want to hear more. Now, to understand this setting, and then he goes 5, 6, and 7. Some believe that this is all one long run-on teaching. Others believe that these are fragments of teachings that a later person, Matthew or somebody, put together in a progression or an order. Nevertheless, he then goes on, and we're going to look today at verses 38 through 42. Now, to give you an idea of the setting, imagine if Canada conquered America. Imagine if the Canadians finally said, we've had enough of it. And they came south on horses. Imagine if we found out that all those years, the reason why it was so quiet up there is because they were planning. And what if they forced us to watch hockey and eat maple syrup with all of our meals? And some of you are like, great. When's that going to be? Imagine if we were conquered by Canada. And imagine if the Canadians, in conquering us, had a bit of an issue because they had soldiers everywhere. And especially if we all gathered in large public gatherings, they would get very nervous because maybe we were fomenting rebellion. So right outside these doors would be a whole battalion of people on horses and said things like, you better not be a boot, anything dangerous. And what if they had to pay for this army that was occupying the United States of America? And so they said, well, we'll just tax Americans. So imagine if you had the percentage of your income right now that's taxed by the American government. But then what if you were also, in addition to that, taxed as much or more by the Canadian government. Well, how many of you, if you were taxed twice what you're taxed now, or 2.5 times now, how many of you would be in financial trouble pretty quickly? Yes. Okay. This is first century Israel. They had been conquered by the Roman Empire, a giant global military superpower, and so there were Roman soldiers everywhere in Israel. Now, this is a bit of a problem, because if you're a Jew in this crowd, as a good God-fearing Jew, you believed that you were God's people. You came from this tradition, going all the way back to Abraham, who has many sons, and many sons has Father Abraham. And I wanted this for you, so let's all keep going. So, you have this story that you've been raised in. And the story you were raised in is a story of blessing. God has blessed you so that you would bless the world. Because this one true God who made everything wants everybody to know the love of God. And so you, as a good Jew, you have been specially chosen to spread this message of a loving God, a just, fair God of peace and shalom to the world. But you have a problem, because you've been conquered by this foreign army who's taxing you to the point where you are in financial trouble. And the problem is, this Roman government, these Roman soldiers, don't even believe in your God. They actually have a whole set of other gods. They actually laugh. They have jokes about you and your funny little customs with your funny little God who doesn't even have any statues. What kind of God has rules about having no graven images? What kind of weird little people you are? Literally, the Romans would say things like, this dispute they're having, this is just silly little things they do over in the corner of the empire. So imagine if you're supposed to be God's people who are called to bless the world, and not only, you're the small minority of people in the corner of this giant empire who are oppressed, who are being taxed to the hilt. And where is that story about the big God who made everything? And these Roman soldiers are everywhere. They run the show. So you can see this story. You can see in the stories of Jesus, this was the story of his people. You can see shame, guilt, feelings of how bad are we? We're everywhere. A whole people going, what has happened? It wasn't supposed to be like this. And it was humiliating because these Roman soldiers, their job was to keep you in line. So on a regular basis, daily, you would bump up against the rules of this Roman army because you were living as an occupied people. Jesus says, verse 38, now you've heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This is actually a passage to cut down on violence by simply saying, if somebody wrongs you, then they need to pay back just what they've wronged, not more. So it was a way to curb excessive revenge. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Well, you are surrounded by people doing cruel and inhumane things to you. I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Now, the word resist is the word antihistamine, which I think is where we get antihistamine, because it resists illness. But anti, against, histamine, to stand. It's actually a military term, and involving violence and armed insurrection. So when Jesus says, do not resist, he's saying, you have 1,000 opportunities every day to pick up a sword and to fight back. Their military being occupied by this foreign army. Every day you had 1,000 opportunities to be humiliated, shamed, angered, provoked. And Jesus says, okay, don't pick up a sword and resist in a violent, disruptive, destructive sort of flashing sword sort of way. He then proceeds to give us several verses of resistance, although it's not of this kind. So when someone says, hey, you're just not supposed to resist, like you're just supposed to kind of passively, not what he's teaching. Specific word meaning don't do to them what they're doing to you. Then he shifts in and gives us 3 examples. In this, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, I need 2 volunteers, preferably men because of the violent nature of what we're about to enact. So I need two volunteers with extremely low thresholds of embarrassment. Yes, Chris, right there. Yes, you right there, blue sweatshirt. Come on down. Okay, now, we're going to see. Are you like pointing at him? You're like taunting him? Do you know him? Oh, you do? Okay. You went to Guatemala together. How you doing, Chris? Good to see you. This is Chris, and you are?
Cody.
Pardon?
Cody.
Cody, where are you from?
Byron Center.
Byron Center? Are you in school?
Yeah.
What school?
South Christian.
South Christian.
Yeah.
What's the mascot there?
I don't know. Sailor?
You don't know.
It's a sailor.
Sailor.
Yeah.
South Christian Sailors.
Yes.
Well, that's intimidating. You're going to, like, float towards us. Ooh. That's, you know, just wanted to point out, is there a body of water next to your school?
Not that I know of.
It's a little awkward, isn't it?
Yeah.
So anyway, you ever feel like you're being watched?
Yeah. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit? Okay. If you can stand right here on this tape right here. Chris, if you can stand here. Okay. Now, if you can get a little bit closer. Okay. Now, touch it back. I don't know what that is. Okay. Now, in the Jewish culture, people had back then two hands. A right hand, a left hand. Once again, we want to fully understand what's going on in this passage. Now, your hands had very symbolic and practical uses. The right hand was considered clean. The right hand of God, right hand of power. Being right-handed was generally the understanding that this was strength, power, skill. Your right hand was used for eating. Like when Jesus says, the one who dips their hand in the bowl is the one who will betray me. Your right hand was used for eating. Now, the left hand was considered unclean. You would eat with the right hand. With the left hand, you would use it to perform those daily functions of body maintenance that allowed things to go smoothly. So, the left hand and right hand were used for vastly different things. This is why you would not eat with the left hand. Now, Jesus says, if somebody slaps you on the right cheek. Now notice, you can't hit somebody. He can't hit him on the right cheek because he just can't do it unless he like curves it or something. So if somebody slaps you on the right cheek. Now there were two ways you would hit a person. You could slap them or you could hit them. A slap was something you did to somebody who was beneath you. Remember, culture had a very strict hierarchy. And you would slap somebody. A master would slap a servant. Some men would slap women. Slapping was how you treated somebody who you believed was below you, a notch or two down. So he's a master and his slave misbehaves. He slaps them because he's the owner, he's the master, and he's better. He's above. He's a couple clicks up on the hierarchy. You would only hit somebody who you considered an equal. You would only hit somebody who was on the same rung. That was the way two equals went at it. Jesus says, if somebody slaps you... Now, the Romans saw the Jews as beneath them. So slapping, this was something you saw all the time. Masters, slaves, Romans, Jews. You saw this, soldiers, civilians. You saw this all the time. Jesus says, if somebody slaps you with the right hand, turn to them your left cheek. Now, wait. Can he slap with the back of his hand the left cheek? No. What if he turns the left cheek? The only way, and you're not going to do that because that's just gross. But it's like there are rules to cruelty. Now, if he turns his left cheek, this puts him in the awkward position of he slapped round one. But now, if he's going to hurt him, he can't slap. He's going to have to do what? Hit. Whoa. Because the initial slap was he sees himself as better than him. But if he turns the cheek, what is he saying? I know you slapped me. I know you think you're better than me, but take your best shot because you and I are equals and you will not treat me as an inferior. This calls out the left cheek calls out his entire value system. Does that make sense? He has made, this is blatant, public, you will not treat me that way. Here's my left cheek. Here's what I think about you. You and I are equals, and I am not an inferior. Well, as a slave, as a Jew, this is absolutely provocative, because now this person's in the awkward position. If they hit him, then he has just said what about their standing? They're what? Whoa. He has just put him in a terribly awkward position. Imagine he's a slave, and he now, if he hits him, what has just happened to the whole cultural caste system? He has just subverted it. He's turned the whole power thing upside down. The crowd would have been like, okay, this is genius. Jesus is giving them practical tools to turn the whole power violence thing upside down. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to get dressed. There are 2 cloaks here. If you could please put them on. You're going to be purple. And you're going to be, I believe the sailors are turquoise and tan. Yeah. The sailors. That's so awesome. Like at a basketball game, ahoy, matey, ahoy. That is just unbelievable. Basketball team and docksiders. Okay, come on now. Now, no idea where we're at. Oh, yes. Now, next verse. Verse 40. And if anyone, example number 2, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Now, these taxation rates had well, imagine if we had double taxation rates. How many of us would be in bad shape? How many of us would lose our house? How many of us, our business would be in trouble? If we had double taxation rates, our economy would disintegrate quickly. This is what was happening at the time of Jesus. When Jesus says things like, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? That's not nice kind of, Jack Handy thoughts about how the world is. He's saying, how bad has the economy gotten? So Jesus lived and moved in the midst of an economy that was falling apart. And what had happened is these good Jews had family lands. Your father gave to his father, gave to his father, and down the tree this land was passed, a vineyard, an olive grove, wheat, barley. And so you had this plot of land you were working. But things were getting so bad you couldn't afford to keep the family land. So in a lot of cases, people were having to sell off land that had been in their family, sometimes since the book of Joshua, like the original entrance into the land. So you can imagine, once again, the crippling shame and humiliation of my father and my father's father and my father's father and my father's father farmed this piece of land. And now I got to sell it because I can't make ends meet. You can imagine the profound sense of letting down your ancestors. The shame and humiliation is all through this culture. And so what would happen is there were people who were wealthy, who wore purple, had a certain element of wealth, and when they found somebody who was struggling, well, really, I'll take that piece of land, sure. And so what had happened is some of these folks were ending up working their own piece of land, sometimes for like a day wage. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. Jesus' teachings are often absentee landlords. There's somebody who is amassing these family lands and getting wealthier and wealthier and then hiring out some of these folks to do their grunt work. Now, Jesus says if somebody sues you, so let's say you owe somebody money, and this person who sues you obviously has the means to take you to court. So they're not doing poorly, they're doing fine. And you are in a bad, tight spot. Deuteronomy had said that if you owed somebody something they couldn't pay them back, you could take your coat and give it to them, or your shirt. You could give one of the garments. You'd wear 2 garments. You'd wear a garment up against your skin, like a tunic, and then you'd wear a coat over top of that. It says you could give this as a pledge to a person to say, I know I owe you, but I give you this as a pledge. I'm going to try to figure out how to pay you. And he says if somebody comes after you, and they legally are suing you because the only thing of worth you have left is your coat. This is how bad it's gotten. All you have left is your coat. You have no more way to pay things off. And this person is coming to you legally saying, you owe me. If they sue you for your shirt, give them your coat also. Well, wait. There's 2 garments everybody would have been wearing. If he takes off his shirt or coat, what is he now wearing? Exactly, and it's not his birthday. Now, this is huge. If they sue you, and this guy can do this, he's legally totally justified. The legal system, he is just following standard legal procedure. Okay, this guy owes him money, he's just getting more and more and more. This guy, Jesus says, offer him your shirt as well. So here's the picture. He hasn't taken it yet. He's just offering him his shirt. Now he's standing here, say it with me. Exactly. Exactly. You should be turning red. Here's why. In Jewish culture, nakedness wasn't first and foremost the shame or the humiliation of the person who was naked. It was always the person who was viewing it. That's why Noah's sons, when Noah gets drunk and naked, are so in such a bad place, is because they witnessed it. It's the person who witnesses it who's the person who has the shame and humiliation. This guy stands here. The picture Jesus paints is of someone standing here, buck naked, which then puts all of the shame on who? This dude. So his actions, it doesn't matter if they're legal, which they are, his actions have brought shame on who? Yes. Imagine the shame and humiliation of being so destitute that you literally were getting sued for the very clothes on your back. This guy has just taken all of his shame, his poverty, and has instantly, in handing out the cloak, now turned it around. And this guy, he's just flipped the whole thing. Now this guy is left in this awkward position. What kind of hard-hearted, greedy, cruel person would actually take his second garment? Here's the genius. This guy, apparently. I mean, to oppressed, shamed, humiliated people, these teachings are electric. They're taking the situation and saying, hand it over and see what happens. Now, this is fascinating because what happens? This guy, with the shirt being extended to him, this guy has a what? He has a choice. So this guy, who's essentially exploiting his situation for his own gain, right now has this choice. Does he take it? Or there's always the chance that this guy will see the situation for what it is and say, okay, I don't want to be the guy taking the shirt and the cloak. There's always the chance that something will happen in his heart. And he'll say, in fact, actually, you can have your shirt back. His gesture not only spins the situation, but always actually opens up the opportunity that this guy might have a change of heart. Either way, this guy has reasserted his dignity. He may be buck naked, but he still has something. He has reasserted, I cannot let you treat me like this. Now, if you can take off your cloak. Third example, and if you could become an extremely intimidating Roman soldier for just a second. I'm going to give you this shield, and then I'm going to give you this sword, and be very careful, it's very sharp. And then we're going to give you that Roman engineer's hat. Yeah. Ooh. He's either in the service of a military machine or he's just been to Burger King. So awesome. Now, everywhere you went were Roman soldiers. And Roman soldiers were required to carry their pack when they went from place to place. And a pack would contain all of their belongings, everything they needed to survive, to wage war, etc. Their pack would generally range 50, 60, maybe even 80 pounds. So everywhere you went, you would see these Roman legionnaires, and they would be hiking around, fully sorted up, girded up, carrying their pack. Now, if you could just walk like around the edge of the stage, just laps, just round and round and round. So the sight of a Roman soldier, whatever that was, doing that, is all over. This is a common daily experience. Now, next verse. And verse 41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Okay, so you keep walking. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile. Now, there were strict rules among the Roman army. When you conquered a land and you were oppressing a foreign people, there was strict protocol about what you could and couldn't demand of your subjects. One of the things you could demand, according to Roman military law, is you could demand that somebody who you'd conquered, namely a Jew in this case, could carry your pack for 1 mile. If they carried it more than 1 mile, that was considered cruel. Because when you're conquering the world and slaughtering lots of people, whatever you do, don't be cruel. So, there were specific rules that were enforced by the generals and those commanding officers beneath them about what you could and couldn't demand an oppressed group that you were conquered to do. So this passage says, if a Roman soldier forces you to go 1 mile, so this Roman soldier sees you and says, hey you, hey you.
Hey, you.
That's terrifying. Carry my pack. He would take the pack, and then he would carry the pack for him. Okay, now you just walk, just consistent, just keep going all the way around, laps. Then he would go behind you, because you're like, see that? So he can poke you and do whatever that is, that freestyle there. And now, by law, he could command you to go 1 mile. If this guy goes more than 1 mile, what happens? Well, this gets quite interesting. Jesus says, if they force you to go 1, then go 2. Okay, let's say he crosses the 1 mile mark, and he's now into the 2nd mile. Now, all of a sudden, what has happened? Keep going. If you're this guy, and this guy's now into the 2nd mile, what immediately starts to happen? Who do you not want to see this happening? You're commanding what? Yeah, your commanding officer. If the general sees this, that you are breaking military protocol, you could get pay-docked, you could get put in military jail. This is not a good scene for you. So you are now in the awkward position of having a shield, a sword, being an extremely powerful person, but you are right now asking this person to do what? Stop. This guy now has the what in the relationship? The power. Now, is it a power rooted in coercion and violence? No, it's a power that comes from generosity. It's like the ultimate judo move. You now have a soldier following a poor peasant going, please stop, please stop, please stop. When Jesus told this, if someone says, how would the crowd have responded to this picture? They would have loved it. They would have been like, this is genius. He has spun the whole thing, and his act of generosity has exposed the cruelty of this forcing to go 1 mile. Now you can stop, take off your pack, you can take off your Burger King outfit. Thank you very much. Let's thank them. Well done. Now, perhaps you've heard these words of Jesus quoted, or you've heard this before. Let's take a moment and unpack this, because it is absolutely mind-blowing what Jesus is doing here. This original audience would not have heard these teachings as kind of high and lofty gestures about how to be nice. These were practical, tangible ways to subvert the shame and humiliation and oppression and assert your own humanity. Now, first off, the difference between pacifism and violence. Next slide. The options that the culture had given them were do nothing to the shame and humiliation, to the violence that's being done to you. Number 2, or do something violent in return. So you had some who had a passive sense of despair. There's nothing we can do about what's happening to us. You just got to take it. There's another group that said, oh, no, grab your sword and fight back. Resistance. So you had these 2 options. The 2 options, which I would argue are alive and well today, in the face of violence and injustice. There's nothing you can do, or you must respond with an equal or even greater violence or injustice. They swing the sword at you, swing the sword back. They swing the sword at you. There's nothing you can do, just take it. Jesus, next slide, is not offering pacifism. He's not saying in the face of violence, injustice, do nothing. And he's even saying, do not resist. He is not saying respond with evil, respond with unjust, respond with violence. He is giving them a third way. It's doing something, but it's a brilliant, creative gesture that does a whole litany of things. Can you see why there is a whole strand of Christian faith that refers to Jesus and the Jesus movement as the third way? Does that make sense? And you will find this all throughout theology and all throughout Christian faith, that that's what we've been trying to do here. Some of you said, Mars Hill, it just feels like it's different. From the beginning, we've been trying to articulate essentially a third way. Our culture often gives us two options. Would you agree? Are you this or this? Are you part of that group or part of that group? Are you going to do this or are you going to do this? And central to our understanding of what it means to be a Christian is, no. We don't fall for the fact that this is all there is. Our assumption is that there is always going to be a Jesus way, which is somehow going to transcend the only two options that we've been given. Next slide. Jesus does not say do nothing. He turn, hand over, go. If you're taking notes, these are verbs. He's giving them something to do. Nonviolence. And this tradition, the Christian tradition of nonviolence, it's not pacifism and it's not violence. It's a third way, which is action. It's just a particular kind of focused, disciplined action in the face of the world's injustice. Now, let's just make a couple observations about what these gestures do. Turning the cheek, handing over the cloak, or walking the extra mile. What they do, next slide, is these gestures expose or unmask the situation for what it is. When this person slaps the person, they're essentially saying, I as a human being am superior to you as a human being. My worldview is that I am a click or two higher on the human ladder. When this person turns their cheek, what they're saying is, I confront that worldview with the fact that all humans are equal. It exposes the violence and the deep, destructive attitude that says, I'm better than yours. In the second case, when he hands over the cloak, what this person's gesture is doing is exposing. Now, it's obviously legal, but nevertheless, it's a whole system that's robbing people of things as basic as their clothing. It exposes, and it shows people the cruelty of what's happening. In the third case, going the extra mile exposes the violence and the inhumanity of using somebody like a pack mule to carry your stuff around, treating somebody essentially like an animal, poking them along. And here's the brilliance. When Jesus does this, when you expose or unmask, you give the other person who has done the original evil the chance to do the right thing. When he turns the cheek, this person is given the opportunity, we're equals, to not hit again. When he offers the cloak, it opens up the option that this person might say, what am I doing? No, here, take back your coat. In fact, I don't want to be a part of something that takes people's basic necessities away from them so that I can have more than I need. When he goes the extra mile, it gives the Roman soldier the opportunity to see, what kind of system am I perpetuating that turns people into animals? The brilliance of Jesus. If you do nothing, you've done nothing. If you respond with violence, you are not giving room for the other person to maybe, and this might not happen, we all know that, to have a change of heart. Let's give an example from 1989 of what happens when somebody exposes and unmasks a situation for what it is. How many remember when this picture first started circulating? What did this picture do other than change the entire opinion of the world? Not much. Why is the picture, even to this day, so powerful? Because this one guy, by the way, they call him Tank Guy. They don't know his name. They don't know where he came from, and to this day, they haven't been able, there's all these legends about who exactly it is. All we know is he came in, posed for this picture, and then they don't exactly know. There are all these fascinating stories about who they think he might be and where he might have been. But what does the picture do to you? This one man standing there, and they think it's a shopping bag or a coat. They don't even know what he's really holding there. Standing there, exposed, a whole unjust system. And the world went, hey, wait, I know whose side I'm on. In fact, there's even legend that when the person driving the tank lifted up the lid to see who this was standing there, what the guy said is to the driver of the tank, "Why are you here?" I love it. Brilliant. What does it do? What does this gesture do? It exposes a whole system. And we all go, okay, I know whose side I'm on, and it's not the tank. That's Jesus doing here, is he's unmasking and exposing the situation. And the tank stopped. The tank stopped. This is what brilliant nonviolence does, is it forces people, what exactly am I doing here? And the tank stopped. Now, what is going on at an even deeper level here when the person shows their cheek or strips, is they are asserting their humanity. You will not treat me as anything less than a human being. An excellent question to ask yourself when you find yourself in a situation thinking, okay, the proper response isn't to do nothing, and the proper response isn't to respond with revenge, vengeance, to do similar evil back to them, is simply to ask, what does it mean in this situation to reassert my humanity? What is the move I can make here that will simply remind everybody that I am a human being? Now, there's all sorts of other places that we could go, but let's go to the idea of imagination. Next slide. Now, we talked about in the myth of redemptive violence, when people are stuck in this pattern of just trying to get revenge and this person wrongs them and they go back with revenge. One of the first things we do is we vilify or demonize our adversary. Things escalate. But number 3, what often happens is the reason why we respond with violence is because we can't imagine. We just say, well, this is how the world works. Somebody does this to you, then you got to do something back. And the world that Jesus lived in, people essentially believe they have 2 options: to do nothing or to respond in violence. But what Jesus is doing here is he's using imagination and creativity. Say, no, there's plenty you can do here. You're not powerless. You aren't at the mercy of the Roman Empire. You can do something. Now, I imagine the first time somebody took the pack and started walking the 2nd mile, and there's a Roman soldier after them going, please stop, I beg you, please stop. I imagine people were like, oh, that's brilliant. Go, pack guy, go. Correct? By about the 50th time somebody had done this, or the 100th time somebody went the 2nd mile, do you think the Roman army at some point caught on to the whole pack thing? Yeah, oh, gee, look, another creative Jew carrying a pack a 2nd mile. Wow. Ooh, stop, please. I imagine they caught on. So it's genius, but only for a period of time. And then they would be left having to think up what? Another creative, imaginative way to reassert your humanity and to not fall into the trap of doing nothing or responding in violence. See, the way of Jesus is the way of imagination. It's the way of creativity. It's the assumption that there's got to be some other way here. The situations you have found yourself in, how many times do we fall victim to a lack of creativity? Well, there's nothing really to do here other than, or we simply say, well, there's nothing really to do. Jesus' way of nonviolence is always there's something here. I am not powerless. I am not, with my hands tied behind my back, unable to do something. The question is, what is the imaginative, new, fresh thing that can be done that will turn this situation in a really God-honoring sort of way? By the way, the 3 things Jesus does are all rooted in generosity. I'm going to give you the chance to be generous here. I'm going to go 2 miles instead of 1. I'm going to let you hit me and give you the chance to see that I'm not below you. It's always rooted in generosity. Can I give you a brilliant historical example of nonviolence? Okay, we have a couple minutes to go. I want to show you one. This is not directly influenced by Jesus. This happened roughly in the 1st century. To me, this is a classic example of what happens when people think in a third way. Next slide. Now, this is the Roman Emperor Caius. He ruled the world in the middle of the first century. He was absolutely feared. He was one of the Caesars, and his rulership of the Roman Empire was checkered with all sorts of questionable things. Nevertheless, giant army, most powerful man in the world. He decided, because he liked statues of himself, he decided, I would like, because they had obviously conquered Israel, I would like a statue of myself placed in the temple of the Jews in Jerusalem, which the Jews thought was a great idea. Wow, this cruel murderer of thousands of people, let's put his statue in the temple of God. No, the Jews were like, you can't be serious. Because the second commandment, you shall make no graven images. So a graven image of a guy who called himself a god on earth didn't go over too well with the Jews in Jerusalem. Would you agree? Okay, yeah. No, bad idea. We don't want that. So, Caius sent Petronius, one of his main generals, to Jerusalem with a statue of himself to be put in the temple of the Most High God. Petronius landed at Caesarea, and he and a giant battalion of soldiers were headed from Caesarea to Jerusalem with this statue to put it up in the temple of the God of the Jews. The Jews were so furious. They were so upset and so this cannot happen, that a group of farmers, next slide, a group of essentially poor Jewish farmers from the Galilee, which is where Jesus came from, met Petronius on the road outside of Caesarea. They met him and parked themselves in the middle of the road. Now, a historian records what they said to the general of the most powerful army in the world. So you have simple, poor, peasant farmers. What are you going to do with the most powerful army in the world? I've got a shovel and I'm not afraid to use it. You know what I mean? This hoe is a registered weapon. And what are you going to do? A historian says that they said this. Next slide. They replied, we will not by any means make war with him, but still we will die before we see our laws transgressed. So they stand in the road and they say, we'd rather die than have Caius' statue put in the temple of our God. Next slide. So these farmers threw themselves down upon their faces and stretched out their throats and said they were ready to be killed. And this they did for 40 days. So these farmers lay down in the road, most powerful army in the world. Could you please move? Could you please move? Could you please move? These farmers, poor peasant farmers, stretch out their necks in the road for 40 days and say, please slit our throats. We'd rather have you chop off our heads than know that that statue is going in that temple. Notice the small detail Josephus adds, this historian. Next slide. And in the meantime, left off the tilling of their ground. Now, how did Caius get his food? Jewish farmers. Yeah. So you're in a bit of a bind if you're the most powerful man in the world, because them laying there exposing their necks means they're not working their farms, which means they're not taking care of their food, which means who is ultimately going to have an issue of food supply? Caius. Does everybody get this? Genius. And what was Petronius forced to do with one of the most powerful armies in the world at this time? He turned around and went back to Caius. Can't do it. Can't do it. History is filled with brilliant people who thought up all sorts of imaginative, creative ways to face down injustice, cruelty, and oppression and say, there's another way. Now, there's a book called by a guy named Mark Kurlansky. It's amazing. It's called Nonviolence, 25 Lessons in the History of a Dangerous Idea. An excellent stocking stuffer, I might add. Now, it's essentially an overview. It's a historical overview of the history of nonviolence. So it covers everything from Gandhi to Rosa Parks. It's got the whole spectrum in there. Partway through the book, in this mainstream historical overview of nonviolence, he ends one chapter in the couple minutes that we have. If someone, here's what he says, were to come along who would not compromise, he's talking about world history, who would not compromise, a rebel who insisted on taking the only moral path, rejecting violence in all its forms. Such a person would seem so menacing that he would be killed. And after his death, he would be canonized or deified, because a saint is less dangerous than a rebel. This has happened numerous times, but the first prominent example was a Jew named Jesus. He says, you know the danger? That when he says canonized or deified, what he says is if you hyper-spiritualize, the danger would be if somebody actually did it. The danger would be that this person's message would get hyper-spiritualized. It would become about some other world, and people would lose the fact that his message was about this world here today. Jesus was talking to real people in real situations, under real oppression, facing real evil, and saying, there's a third way. Here's a question that haunts me, and it should drive us. Because you're like me, we face all sorts of situations every day. The question a Christian ought to ask all the time, when given the standard, totally lame, uncreative solutions the world gives us, options, would simply to ask in every situation, is there a third way here? God, we want to be people of the third way. We want to take Jesus' message of nonviolence, and we want to be bold, imaginative, creative, and we